Hello, I'm Alistair McIntyre. I'm the web publisher for the Electric Scotland website, and today I just wanted to talk to you about the online books that we have on the site. We must have certainly over 500 books that have been OCR from the paper book onto the web in text. When I first started the site, Google didn't exist. There was no Internet Archive. And basically there was no history of Scotland when I first started the site. And so after having thought the whole thing through, I thought that what I could best do to contribute to the web and to contribute to the history of Scotland was actually finding antiquarian books, and that I felt were good and really taught us a lesson, and were also a good read, were enjoyable to read. Because admittedly some history is pretty boring really. So that's what I determined to do, and so in those days that meant going to antiquarian bookshops and actually looking through the shelves to see what might be available and might be suitable. Then I would buy the book, I would bring it back, and I would OCR that onto the site. So that's how it all kind of got started. What I love about history is that there's just so much you can learn. It's a bit like, I found, for example, when I was doing one set of books for the site, they decided to talk about how the Scots, 30,000 Scots had gone to fight for Germany. Well, of course, I was very much aware of World War I, World War II, where we were fighting against Germany. So when it said 30,000 Scots went to fight for Germany, I thought, what is that? I haven't heard anything about that. And I mean, you might say that in those days Scotland might have had 1 million of a population, so 30,000 fighting Scots going. That was a huge army, huge. So I wanted to learn more, and of course went to one of my favourite antiquarian bookshops and started a hunt, and eventually I found a book about the Scots in Germany. And of course that answered all my questions. But then I found on the same shelf by the same author not only the book The Scots in Germany, but the Scots in East and West Prussia, and also the Scots in Poland. So I also bought those and put those up on the site. And much later, I mean several years later, I found out he'd also done the Scots in Sweden, as it happens. So that book's also up on the site. But it's just getting into the world. I mean, I, for example, was kind of interested in this pioneering stuff, and thinking, how do we get to places like America and Canada, and how did we go through settlement of those places? And an example would be, I found a book about the Scots in Argentina, and so that's up on the site. But then I got emails in because people had found it and were reading it, and these emails were saying, is there any chance you could find the book, the Scots on the River Plate and their churches? Because they were basically saying they were into genealogy of the Scots in Argentina, and apparently that book had a whole ton of names in it. So I went to look to see if I could find anything. I'll find out where I could get the book. The only one I could find was at the University Library of Edinburgh. And of course I thought, there's no chance I'm going to get a copy of that from Edinburgh because I'm in Canada. But as it happens, I knew Dr. Graham Morton, who was the Chair of Scottish Studies at the University of Guelph in Canada. And I knew that he had been a professor at Edinburgh University when he left there to take up this post. So I thought I'll email him because maybe he would know some way I could maybe get a copy of the book to put up. Well, he very kindly emailed me back to say, as it happens, Alistair, we do have a copy of that book at the McLaughlin Library here at the University of Guelph. And he said, I've had a talk with a librarian, and he says if you phone him and tell him when you're coming, he'll arrange to give you a wee private room where you can photograph the book if you wish. So, needless to say, I went down to University of Guelph, photographed the book and put it on the website. But why I wanted to go a little bit further than that is that I don't always put up books about Scots if I feel they contribute to our understanding. And of course, remember my interest was in settlement. Well, I came across a book about a family, it was an English family, that decided they were going to emigrate to Argentina. And I found this book online, and I was just reading it online. And in fact, I read the whole book online in one sitting. It just was so fascinating. I mean, for example, he made the decision, he talked with his wife about it, and she agreed that they should try this settlement in Argentina. And he had 2 sons and 2 daughters. But he took a whole year to prepare how to go there. And for example, he knew they spoke Spanish in Argentina. So he hired a Spanish maid for the household, and she got to teach them all how to speak Spanish. In fact, I might add that when they did go to Argentina, they took her with them, and she just became a long-term member of the family. But as part of the preparation, he sent his sons to a farm that had cattle and sheep, so they could learn how to manage them. And then after about 6 months of that, the other 6 months they were sent to a carpenter, where they learned to build a house, frame up a house and everything, and also build necessarily furniture and tools and so forth. His daughters were taught to sew and weave, and also how to look after chickens and that kind of thing. But then he taught both his sons and daughters how to ride horses, because they would need to ride a horse to get around in the country. And he also taught them all how to shoot a rifle and a pistol, because clearly there were savages in those areas and you could well be attacked, so we had to defend themselves. So he put all of this preparation into the family before they even went on the ship to Argentina. And then of course when you follow him, you see how he went about getting the land and how he managed to buy cattle and sheep to start to get it going, how they built their house and got the crops in and so forth. So it was a really fascinating account of settlement. And I might add that they talked in the book about their Scottish neighbours, because a lot of Scots out there at the time. And then, of course, I wanted to know more about settlement in both America and Canada. And I got a very good book. I was in Prince Edward Island, and it was actually a book about the Simpsons of Prince Edward Island. But in there, it went into amazing detail about the settlement process and how you went about it. And of course, if you ask most people, say, oh yeah, they got into the woods to get their lot, they cut the trees down and built their farms. I mean, you can say that so quickly, but to do it in practice, it was a whole different story. And of course, as I've been researching, I found some really good accounts of settlement. I mean, for example, if you think of it, back in those days, the forests had been untouched by human hand, literally. So they'd been there for centuries, these forests. And in those days, the trees grew much bigger than they are today. But clearly they would have storms and tornadoes and all kinds of things. And so when you went into the forest to get to your lot, quite often there were huge trees lying across your path, and you either had to go over them, under them, around them. And quite a few people actually got lost because they were zigzagging all over the place and they lost their directions. But when they got there, most of them would pitch a tent to start with, and then as they cut some trees down, they would build a lean-to for temporary shelter. But then as they started to clear more trees down, obviously they could then start to look at building a proper log cabin. But often the first crop was actually planted between the tree stumps. And in fact, if you think of that, one of the other books that I put up had a little paragraph in it, and it was about how the grandson suddenly burst into the house and says, Grandad, we've got the last stump out. And I mean, they were actually in tears. But that was the 3rd generation they'd gone to get all the stumps out of the land. I mean, just amazing. Even to the point where, certainly in Canada, where the winters are fairly fierce and obviously the water freezes, they had to build a well to ensure running water during the winter. But these wells could be 30 feet down, and just think about the primitive implements they had at that time, digging that well. They're having dug it, they have to support it as well. to support the walls of the well. But even when they got to the top, they had to build a 3-foot wall or fencing around it so the wee kids wouldn't tumble into the well. But they equally well had to build something that would cover the top of the well so all the leaves and garbage wouldn't keep going down there. So building a well was a massive operation in its own right. And then you learn, as they were starting to get settled, that the local cobbler would basically have a backpack with him, and he would travel around all the little settlements in the area, or the farmhouses. And quite often he'd stay there for a few days, because while he was there, they'd be put up, while he made shoes for all the kids and the mother and father and so forth. And then when that was finished, he'd move on to the next farmstead. But as a lot of the settlers, certainly the Scottish settlers, the one building they really wanted most was a church. And that was pretty much usually the first common building that was built in the community. And that church was quite often the school as well, to start with. But you can imagine, as the church was then built, the school was established, then instead of the cobbler going around all the farms, he just put a shop up. So you could come in on the Sunday and maybe stay over or whatever, but you get measured up, and then when you came back the following week, you could pick up your shoes. And of course the blacksmith would come in, and eventually you get a grocer would come in, a multi-purpose shop and stuff like that. And of course a lot of these very early little villages, some became towns, and a few of those towns became cities eventually. So it's just fascinating to me to look through all of that. So you'll find all of that kind of information on the website. But clearly we've got a lot more. I mean, I've just recently, because of a suggestion that came in to us from one of our newsletter readers, she was saying that you've got so many books, it'd be nice if you could kind of categorize them somehow. So we've recently done a bit of a categorization. We've got a section now which is on places in Scotland. Because over the years, while I've done general histories of Scotland, I've also been very interested in doing histories of individual places. Now, we've done the major places like Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen and Inverness, but I wanted to go down the layers, so we've done histories of like Dumfries and the Borders, done Moffat and the Borders, Howick, but we've equally done wee glens in the Highlands or small communities. And all of these are fascinating, and certainly if you're ever going for a holiday to Scotland, and you're going to a particular place, you should look at to see whether we've got something on that area. And if you have, you should read the history. You'll learn all kinds of things about the area. And so when you do go there, there'll be tons of places to go and see. So you can relate that history to what you're seeing today. And then we've got a big section about Scots in the world. And this, of course, is a big part of the site because I personally was very interested. It's like at school, I knew that we had emigrated to all the major countries in the world, but I had no idea what these Scots had done when they emigrated. We were given no information about that whatsoever. They went to Canada, went to America, went to Australia, went to South Africa, went to New Zealand, and so forth and so on. But what they did when they got there was a blank, total blank. And so as I started to explore it, and learned what the Scots had done. In many ways, I feel that's an even bigger story than the history of Scotland, to be honest. It's just totally amazing what the Scots did. And I've been trying to find out why they were so successful. And initially, it's quite difficult to try and work that out. But again, as you find books, they give you, just by reading them, you kind of think, it's giving me an idea. I mean, for example, a lot of emigration came after the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745. It was the last battle on British soil, essentially. But it broke the strength of the clans at that time. Bearing in mind, a clan chief, his power came from the number of people who could raise in arms. So, after the 45, it didn't matter how many people could raise in arms. It wasn't going to do them any good because there's nothing to fight. In fact, it was just after that period that they started to raise the Highland regiments to fight in Europe and so forth. And that was, the clans were always family based, but I'll cover that in a second. But what I would say is that if you've been kicked off your land, you're not very happy with your clan chief, that's for sure. And if you've had to emigrate just to survive, but with your ancestors being in that area for generations and being tied in with a clan, you have this sense of community. And you don't lose that just because you've been kicked off the land and you've gone to foreign soil. So my feeling is that there was still this want of having a community. So wherever the Scots settled, I think they kind of adopted a kind of clan attitude to that new area they'd settled in. So it didn't matter if you were Dutch or German or French or Spanish or whoever you were in the area. You became part of, in quotes, the clan, the new clan, you might say. And I think when you look at the history, the Scots contributed enormously to the communities. They were often the ones that, say, built the churches, but they're usually the ones that built the grist mills and so forth. They were often the ones that got the schools established. In fact, it's amazing the number of universities in the world that were started by Scots, or where the Scots had a major play in getting them formed and built. I mean, we know Princeton, for example. There was two Scots involved. One was Witherspoon, who was one of the signatories to the Declaration of Independence. But later on, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but another one took Princeton way ahead and made it into the major university it is today. That's just one example. There's many like that. But then, as you're reading the histories, like reading about the Highland regiments, they were the premium soldiers in their day. I mean, the Scots fought for everyone, quite literally. There is a story about the famous Battle of Quebec, when General Wolfe, who was English, he won that battle, but he died in it. And the general that took the surrender of Quebec was a Scot. But what most people don't know is the general for the French army in Quebec that gave the surrender was also a Scot. Remarkable. But after the Jacobite Rebellion, a lot of Scots went to France, because otherwise they'd have been hung or sent to Virginia or something. There's a slave plantation or whatever. So a lot of them actually escaped to France. And in fact, after that time, there were 3 regiments of Scots in the French army. And one of the most famous marshals of the French army was the Marshal MacDonald, who was also a Scot. So you can see how a lot of these generals, I mean, we have them, that story I was talking about, Marshal MacDonald, is funny because one of the General Keith he was a general for the Russian army, and he'd been fighting the Turks. And then in the end he was told that they would try and get a peace treaty, so they had a big tent there where he was in. He was talking to the Pasha of Turkey, and between them they were negotiating a peace, and after extensive negotiations they came to a settlement. And when it was signed, everyone else left the tent and just the 2 of them were left in it. And then while he had been speaking in Russian and he'd been speaking in Turkish, they both suddenly talked in broad Scots and talked about the old days in Scotland, because they were both Scots. I mean, it's quite remarkable what you find as you delve into all these histories. The other thing that I've been doing more recently is that looking at the major inventions in the world, the Scots made incredible inventions that changed the world. I mean, like the Industrial Revolution with the steam engine and so forth, and railways, canals, and much better roads. I mean, you talk about telephone and television. I mean, these were just world-changing inventions. And I couldn't really understand how we were so good in that period. As against, I don't think the Scots are nearly as good today as they were back then. And I was trying to figure out why we were so good back in those days. And so what I started to do was I started to do biographies of these very famous Scots that had done mind-blowing things. And what I found out was that there were certain common aspects to their life. I don't think any of them were brought up in particularly rich circumstances. They're all fairly poor. But they all were brought up with the Bible. The Bible was usually the one book they had in the house. And that book was used to teach the kids how to read and write. And of course, in these old days, when the minister came to call, it wasn't just a social chat. He was there on business. He wanted to know that you were bringing up your children properly in the Christian faith. So he would be invited into the good room, and then each of the children would come in to be interviewed by him, and he would quiz them on the Bible. And he expected them to know the Bible. And in fact, it's amazing how many of those children could recite whole passages of the Bible. So clearly their memories were being developed as well. But then the next thing I found is that almost every single one of these famous Scots talked about how they got bashed at school, with a strap or a cane. I mean, one said it seemed like he got the cane several times a week. And he was quite delighted when he actually left school, but clearly the discipline was tough at school. But also when they're talking at school, if you think about the Bible as a book rather than as a religious book, there are actually a whole ton of stories in that Bible, and a lot of these stories teach us how to relate to other people. So if you were going to be stuck with one book, the Bible is actually not a bad book to be stuck with, in actual fact, because it teaches you a whole lot about human relations and everything. I mean, there's romances, there's murders, there's look at the Joseph in his multicolored coat and the stories there, the moral stories it gives you. I mean, there's a whole ton of stuff in the Bible. So you take this thing about using the Bible, and therefore its moral authority, you might say, being brought up in a certain way. You get the discipline at school, and the development of your mind and your memory, and then going out and then just working very hard to make ends meet, and then eventually getting success, and then starting to get money, and then going forth for research. And so, but that was the common theme, I think, was the home life was generally good in the community. You were brought up with the Bible, and you were given hard discipline at school, which meant you had to sit and re-study. You couldn't mess around. And I think that was the common thread on all of those famous people. I don't think there was one that didn't talk about the Bible and talk about discipline at school. Today, you get nothing like that at all. I mean, quite often, if teachers clipped you around the hole, the ear of Social Security would take you out, you'd be prosecuted, and all kinds of things. You'd lose your job and everything. Entirely different back in those days. And I think it's interesting to look at that. So, that's what you're going to find in the book section. Now, I've also put other stuff in the book section, like there's more general histories. There's also histories of things that, mostly I'm putting stuff up that interests me and add to my knowledge. But at the same time, I will put some books up that I am not that interested in, but I feel there's a gap that needs to be explored. I mean, recently I put a message up in my newsletter saying, is there anything that you feel I haven't got on the site that you'd like to see? One person emailed me and said, actually, you don't have anything on emergency services. The ambulances, the firefighters, the police. And he was absolutely right. I had absolutely nothing on them at all. So I went out and dug up and found some good information on all three services. And that's now up on the site. Previously, I hadn't bothered to do anything on sport at all. But I realised there was nothing on sport, so I found books on golf and tennis and bowling and various sports back in the old days. Part of the sport was hunting, of course, and shooting. And then, of course, I got a whole bunch of kids. I think there must have been something in their curriculum at school, because I think it was all in Florida where I must have got maybe, I don't know, I think I must have got something like 60 emails from kids in that kind of area. And they're all saying we'd like to learn more about the wildlife in Scotland. So I'm presuming they've been given a project to do a wildlife in some country other than their own. And I had nothing on wildlife, but I've now got 3 complete books about wildlife up on the site. So it's amazing how it develops. I also started to put up some old Scottish children's books. Part of that was because I I thought to myself, I should put some stuff up for kids, because basically if I can get them reading and enjoying a story, hopefully that will help them. It might give them an interest in history, and so in as they get older, hopefully they'll carry that interest forward with them and they'll enjoy it. And today we have over 800 children's stories on the site, as well as several specific children's books that are on the site. So you get my idea, there's a whole ton of stuff that is on the site. So that's basically the book section. I mean, we've also got PDF books. Partly the reason for that is that I personally have copies of those books. But to OCR them onto the site is really a lot of work. And so when I find, because of the massive scanning that's going in by Google and was going on by Microsoft, that I thought I may at least avail myself of some of these PDF files for the site. So the big important ones, I mean, like the Statistical Account of Scotland, is in 18 volumes. And I had started to OCR it, and I got maybe 2 complete volumes, but I think there's about 18 of them or something. So when I found they'd already been scanned in, I thought, right, I'm just putting them up. But what I tend to do is I don't just say, here's the book. I will do my best to try to add to it. So rather than give you a link just to the book, I'll give you an HTML page where I'll give you the introduction or the preface to the book so you can learn more about it. And in the cases of Statistical Account, I'll obviously name the places that are in that particular volume, whereas you won't get that information when you go to the Internet Archive. I mean, I've done a whole set of historical publications that are in the Internet Archive, but again, if you actually go to the Internet Archive, they're just volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. You haven't a clue what's actually in them. So I ended up downloading a whole lot, the whole series, about 50 odd books, and I went in and managed to take out the contents and preface of each one. So now when you click the link for the book, it actually goes to a web page which you can read the preface, which tells you all about what's in that volume, and if there's contents, it'll be there as well, and then you get the link to download the book. But obviously by reading the preface and that, oh no, that wasn't the one I wanted, you can go to the next one. So I felt that gave an added service to some of it. So when you go to online books, you'll see the PDF, you'll see a link for the antiquarian books. We've also got a number of e-texts, which over the years we've borrowed from Project Gutenberg. But again, everything we've done is really a focus on Scotland and the Scots. So I think that's, so if you're reading the site, you know it's going to be about Scotland and the Scots one way or another. So that's basically the book section. I hope you'll take the time to explore it, because there's a lot of just fabulous books in there that really make a most interesting read. And if you're interested in learning about how the Scots lived in the old days, lots of information on that. And as I say, we've got a whole ton of information now about Scots all over the world. So there you go, that's the book section. You can find the book section on our menu, which is on every page of the site. Just click books and you go to the introductory page. The first link will take you directly to our online books, but underneath that first link we give you subsections, so you can go to a subsection of that same page by clicking on the individual sections. So all I can say is I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you get something good out of it and a lot of fun and learn at the same time. Nice talking to you. Look forward to seeing you on the site.